Okay, someone asked me if it was possible to take a pre-existing spreadsheet that stores forensic data and import it into a database for the purpose of trying to make the search process a little more efficient. The short answer is yes, it's possible. The longer answer is it may or may not be beneficial because databases, their benefit scales with magnitude. In other words, how much data is being collected. Like if you're doing hundreds of transactions or thousands of transactions, yes, a database is great for collecting data rather than trying to manually enter information into a spreadsheet. And another example would be rather than how many searches you're doing or how much data you're collecting, how many separate data sources do you have? Like, for instance, if you have just one spreadsheet, that's not necessarily a lot of data. But if you've got 10, 15, 20 spreadsheets, then yes, collecting that all into one database can indeed be beneficial because rather than having to go to, again, 15, 20 different spreadsheets, you've got one database that you can organize. So we're going to show how to do this, and then you guys can decide if it's something that benefits you. Also, one other thing I want to mention, generally speaking, when I demonstrate how to do something like this, the actual data that's being stored is irrelevant. So for instance, I might do a video that says, hey, here's how you store your book collection in a database. That way you don't keep buying the same book over and over again. And someone's like, oh, great, can you show me how to do that with DVDs? Well, it's the same thing. The functionality is the same thing. So it doesn't matter if title is the title of a book or the title of a CD or the make of a toy car. The functionality is the same. So let's take a look at how we do this. So here is the sample data that they're looking at. So they normally filter C, D, and E, and then that gives them the resulting A. So what we're going to do is we're going to import this into the database. And then instead of having those manual filters, what we're going to do, we're going to show two ways to do this. One will be a simple text field where you can type in the number associated with the individual case, and then it gives you the result. And then the second way we're going to look at is having drop-down boxes. And the reason why I'm going to do it both ways is because depending on what data entry you're doing, the drop-down boxes might not be more efficient. Like if you've got hundreds and hundreds of choices, drop-down box might not be great. Whereas if your choice is just 2 digits and a period, well, it's probably actually easier to type in the number. So I'm going to show you both ways, and then again, you decide for yourself which one works for you. So now what we're going to do is we're going to click on the External Data tab. So we're not going to manually create a data. We're going to import the data, and when we import the data, that will create the table. So let's go to New Data Source, from File, navigate to the appropriate location, select the spreadsheet, click on Open, import the source data into a new table. That's what we said that we wanted to do, that we're not going to manually create a table, but rather have a table be generated by running this process. So, okay. First row contains column headers. Yes, it does. Next. Now, I'm going to go ahead and click on these. And if you notice, data type, I'm going to convert these to text, specifically short text. Do you have to do this? No, not necessarily, but if you are going to store a number and it's not going to be used for a calculation, you may want to consider storing it as text as long as it doesn't create any kind of compatibility issues or mismatch in data types. Because if you're not going to do a calculation, then essentially you're going to want to store it as a string because you don't want to have a number show up, say, as scientific notation if you don't want it to, or maybe be rounded or whatever, that you don't want it calculating those numbers. You want to keep it as text. So I'm not going to say that you're always going to want to change it to text if it's not going to be calculated, but you may want to consider that. So I'm going to go ahead and change these to text. Next. We're not going to do a primary key. I keep saying I'm going to do a tutorial about primary keys and then I never do. You just don't really need it. At least not for this. Then we'll do next. And then we'll call this whatever you want. We'll call it main table, and finish. You can save these steps, but saving import steps is really only necessary if you're going to do the same kind of import over and over and over again. In other words, say someone manually types in a whole bunch of transactions into a spreadsheet, and they do that every single day. And every single day you need to import their spreadsheet into your database. That's when you do save import steps. And there we go. We have our table. So far, so good. So now what we're going to do is we're going to create a form. The form is going to have 3 text fields where you can enter information. And then, well, let's do that first, and then I'll say why we're going to do that. So click on the Create tab. Click on Blank Form. I typically like to get rid of the record selectors. And this one might not make a difference, but I think it's a good habit because you definitely want to lock down your database and prevent people from navigating in a way that you don't intend them to. So on the Design tab, View, Design View, make sure that the form as a whole is selected. Because when you have an object selected, when you look at the properties, it's specific to just that object. Like, for instance, if I put a bunch of buttons or text, every single one of those will have their own properties. So right now, it's just the form, so it's easy enough not to mess up. But just be mindful when you're changing something, make sure you have the right object or control selected. So let's go to Design, and we're going to go to Property Sheet, and we're going to go to Format. So let's see. We want there we go. Record selector, no. Navigation buttons, no. And just to make this a little bit more self-explanatory, we'll put a label at the top. So I just clicked on label, just drag, let go, and we'll call this item lookup. Okay, with that selected, let's go to Home, and let's change, let's 36 look. That looks big. How about 28? That'll do. Bold, underline, trim the box a little bit. Looks like it's about 1.5 on this side, but almost 2.5 on this side. So you can just drag this over. You can actually, there's buttons to center. I'm not worried about it. I'm really concerned more about demonstrating the functionality than making it pretty. Okay, so we have our label there. Now we need to create our 3 fields. So we'll go back to Design, and we want text box. Okay, now what we're going to do is if you grab by the upper corner, you can move the label separately from the control. And then what we're going to do, just going to copy, paste. This time we're going to grab a border, that way both move. And then let's see if we can paste again. We can. Now each one of these is going to correspond to one of the columns, C, D, and E. So what happens is you're going to put a value in here, and then that's going to cause a lookup. So there are a couple more things that we need to do, and they kind of have to be juggled. What we're going to do, we'll save this, and we'll just call this lookup underscore form. We need, so once you put the values in here, we want a query to be triggered. So a query is what is the way that a database searches a table. So you're going to put in values, you're going to hit a button, and it runs a query. So let's do that. Let's do that last as far as the button. Because when you create the button, you have the option of linking it to a query right away. So we're going to move on to the query. So let's click on Create, and we're going to click on Query Design, Main Table. You actually don't have to add it from there. You can just close out that window and drag and drop the main table here. Either way, whichever works better for you. Click on the first one, hold Shift, click on the last one, so we're just bringing everything over. And then what we're going to do is we want these fields to correspond. See how this says criteria here? Okay, so you could actually just manually put in a number here, like say, I think we had somewhere like 7.2 for minimum weight, and you could run this. And there you go. It gives you the ones where it's 7.2. Or instead of entering a constant, you can add a field in here. So you can actually make a reference to this and say, I want that field, whatever's in that field, to be the criteria. So in other words, the field that's going to correspond, the text box specifically, we said we created these text boxes. These, okay, each one is going to correspond to one of these three because he said he wanted to search by C, D, and E. So let's do that. So what we do is in the criteria section, we right-click on nominal and we choose build. And basically, you're going to just navigate down into the database. So you can kind of ignore some of this stuff, and we're just going to focus on this because that's the name of our database. So you expand that. Okay, we said we're going to use a form. Well, we're going to use the loaded form. In other words, it's open. Or you can do it all forms. You can do it either way. It should work. It's just loaded forms only works when it's open. So lookup form. So that's lookup form. And here are what we added. So you can see the label 0. That's the label at the top. And then each label corresponds to one of the text boxes. And so we have text 1, 3, and 5. So let's just confirm. Let's go to, actually we can't like this, but pretty sure it is. So we'll do text 1, defaults to value. Just double click on that. And OK. And so there is your criteria. So rather than a constant, it's now using whatever value you put into that field. So let's just confirm that text 1 name text 1. So this says text 1, but that's just the label. That's actually label 2. So it's a little bit misleading. It says text 1, telling you that this is text 1 because this is the corresponding label, but the object itself is label 2. So sorry for the confusion. That's just the way Access does it. You actually wouldn't leave this as text 1. That's the thing. So you would actually change, these would have proper names. Like you would call this, well, actually, let's change it. So nominal, I believe, was the name of the column. Okay. So nominal is going to be used to search for nominal. Right click, build. Again, drill down. Forensics is the database. We're looking to a form. We're looking to the loaded form. That is the only loaded form. Now it's going to be text 3. And again, we want the value. Okay. I'm not sure why I bother expanding these out. I'm pretty sure they condense back anyways for some reason. At least they used to. So now we'll just come back here. And so this, text 3. So let's go ahead and change the name to match. We said it is min weight. So we'll go back to query. So min weight, min weight. And then the final one, right click, build. So again, this is just rinse and repeat. You're choosing what the criteria is going to be. And there is text 5 value. Now, one more thing I want to clarify is the first time when I ran this, you saw me put in one value. So if you put in multiple values along the same horizontal line, that's inherently an and. So you're saying this and this and this. The reason for I'm saying that is because you could do or. So if you have one here, and one here, you're actually running ors. That they don't all have to be true in that case. Only one of them would have to be true. In this case, we want them all to be true. We want to find the value in, or should I say the record, for column A that these all match. All right, so let's save this, and we'll call this case lookup. Actually, I don't want to use lookup. The last name I've been naming it after the object type, so we'll call this case query because let's call it match query. Case makes it sound like it's an investigation. So it's a match query. You're looking for a match. And again, only meaningful to you. This doesn't tell Access anything. Great. So we have just about everything we need now. So we have the source table. We have a form that is grabbing information. And then we have a query that is looking to the information put in that form to search the table, which then inherently gives you results because a query just gives you results. So you put in the criteria, you run it, gives you results. So the last thing is to get the connectivity between this and that. So let's close our query. And we're back to our form. So we're going to go to Design. We want a button. And again, typical warning. And then I usually don't like to do these, but since it is a basic function, miscellaneous, run query, next, there's only one query, next, and this is just what it looks like. You can give text, run query, or let's change this to find match. And again, normally I like to go into a Visual Basic, write a script, but there's nothing fancy here, so it's fine. Okay. So what happens if you click on this and you look at event, see, that's what you just created, that macro. So I believe everything is in place now for this to work. So we save that. And as I mentioned, the query, it's checking for all three criteria. So if you leave one of these blank, it's not, it's actually looking for a blank. So in other words, it would, since every record has a value for weight, for min weight, if you don't put anything there, it's looking for a record that has a blank min weight, and you won't find anything. So you have to be very, very careful that you don't get false negatives. You must put in all three values. And since I saved everything as text, if I entered something as 0.1, the 0 is retained. So you have to put in the 0 or else it won't work either. So it has to be exactly correct. So we go to View. So 0.1. And I believe there was a 7.2 and a 7.2. Find match, and there you go. Now you could take this one step further, and rather than having just a table query, or should I say a data sheet format, so rather than having the query come up in data sheet mode, okay, you could have a separate report that gives your answers, and then you put like a button that lets you print it up, that kind of thing. So you don't have to stop here. You can have this be embedded in a report. That way you can, again, make it a little easier in the eyes. Not to mention, if you have like 20 or 30 results, you don't want to be going through a spreadsheet. And also, right now, this can be edited. A report can be edited too, I believe. So you do have to be careful about what you're doing with your data. But okay, that should about do it for this first edition. So now you've seen how you can import data and then fairly quickly create a user interface. In this case, you're using a form, and then you link the values in those forms to a query. The query then searches that table that you imported and then gives you your results. Like I said, I can show you a second version that instead of having these, you have a drop-down box. But as I said, if you have a lot of entries, the drop-down box has a kind of diminishing returns. But we'll see. Just let me know. So if you want to see that, just leave a like and a comment, and I will be more than happy to do that as well. Okay, so I hope this was helpful.